Özge Öner. Özge Hoca is an associate professor at University of Cambridge in the Department of Land Economy. She works in a very interesting interdisciplinary field, urban and spatial economics. Özge Hocam, thank you for accepting our invitation. We are really lucky to have you here. And I'm really interested hearing about your research. So the floor is yours, Hocam, please.
Thank you so much, Ömer. I don't know if you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see.
Merhaba herkese. Hello, hi. I would rather be in Ankara, of course, my hometown, and after this maybe converse a little bit and meet some of you at Kıtır and have a bit compare and beer and see my family and enjoy a nice Saturday. I've been very homesick lately because I couldn't travel. It was a very intensive term we had here. That being said, I am very, very happy to be joining you guys, even though it's virtually. Let me see if I should move this. So, right. Okay. I do have more slides than I can cover, so let me begin by saying that it's a very difficult thing to talk about an entire field in something like 20 to 30 minutes, of course, but I will do my best to give you a bit of a sort of a teaser, an appetizer, if you may want to call that. This is something I got to learn about quite late in my academic life. I studied economics for my undergraduate degree, for my master's, and as well as for my PhD. But during my PhD, I ended up in this environment in Sweden where the economics department was extremely specialized in urban and regional economics. So everybody was an economist, but their work, their research was tilted towards applied geography. This is something I'd never heard about before moving to Sweden. And once I stumbled on geography, it was a one-way ticket. I could not be interested in anything else other than working with geography and geographical data. And given the context of this workshop or the seminar, I will try to tell you why data and the quantitative analysis is pretty important for the kind of literature urban and spatial economics is. So I like to call it geography and microgeography of things, basically. Quickly, I am an associate professor in spatial economics and real estate at University of Cambridge. We have a department here that's called Department of Land Economy. It's a combination of lawyers, economists, and urban planners. Everybody is interested in some aspect of space, land, cities, and rural places. Our, for example, lawyer friends study land law, property law, environmental law. Urban and regional planners look at the rules and regulations that govern built environment. And we economists do quite a bit quantitative work on a number of issues that relate to space. I'm also a fellow in economics and land economy at one of the Cambridge colleges here, that's called Sydney Sussex College. And I still am affiliated to two institutes in Sweden. One is focused on entrepreneurship and spatial economics. The other is on retail. And I can tell you all about it, the background of retail a bit, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. For us academics, increasingly so, having science communication or engaging ourselves with public debate it's increasingly important. And I've been trying to do that in my personal academic domain. I've been a columnist, a monthly columnist in one of the mainstream news papers in Sweden for the past, let me think, 2016, for the past 6 years. I still feel like it's 2019. Sorry, guys, pandemic just completely messed up our understanding of time, I guess. But and in Turkey, I try to help out my friends in Daktilo 1984 and do a bit of an editorial work for them. So what do I do? If you are not familiar with urban and spatial economics literature, looking at someone's research profile, you may think that it is almost like a smorgasbord. It's like an open buffet of things. There's no obvious red thread that ties the topics one studies in this line of literature, other than the fact that everything is related to space. So I studied things like geography of firms, particularly location of consumption, so services, retail, arts and entertainment, as well as geography of entrepreneurship. Essentially, if you're looking into firms, you also need to understand who are engaged with these kinds of ventures. Together with my colleagues, we try to analyze the importance of things like local institutions, entrepreneurial well-being, survival of firms, pull and push factors related to space, spatial context. More recently, and because of the nature of things around me in all three countries that I am involved with, Turkey, England, and Sweden, I started also doing a bit of a work on local political preferences. I know you guys said something on political geography, so you can think of this as political geography, albeit operating at a much smaller spatial scale. So we look at neighborhood level indicators for political preferences, and we try to understand why people vote the way they do, which is obviously an identification problem from hell, because who you are dictates the way you vote, and where you live dictates the way you vote. And those two things are not orthogonal to each other, so they're extremely dependent on each other. So if you are doing some quantitative work, trying to isolate, for example, effects from your environments on your political preferences, it is very difficult to hold individual characteristics constant, since people are not randomly distributed in space. So you find a very strong correlation between individual characteristics and spatial characteristics. And this has been more challenging of a domain for me than I could initially anticipate, to be honest. But I would say the thing that's been dominating my research profile over the past roughly 6 years or so is ethnic enclaves and segregation. I'm doing a lot of work at the microgeographical level, again, mostly on Sweden, and I'm about to start doing some work in the UK also, should I have access to the right kind of data. I have some work that's upcoming on what I call alternative food networks. So this is another line of work that's related to agricultural entrepreneurial activities that extend beyond agriculture itself. Think about these as farm shops, sort of short supply chains by which farmers can sell their goods directly, the traditional cooperatives, but some of them are organized in a virtual context. And we're trying to understand this increasing popularity in farm-related economic activities, which we find extremely pleasant for various reasons, including a potential way of mitigating rural decline, as well as for its potential health and environmental implications. So, but this is a project I have been funded for in Sweden that I didn't start working on yet. So I unfortunately am not able to show you a lot of things on that. So I don't know if the previous speakers use this quote, but I would be very surprised if I am the only person who uses this quote, basically. It's from Edward Deming, an entrepreneur, statistician / academic from the US, who said, without data, you are just another person with an opinion. It was a very popular quote to use for those that are exclusively quantitative in their research for a while. So anybody that does anything computational will know this quote, I guess. Coming from a relatively heterodox econ background in Turkey, not having access to the right kind of resources to have computational skills and the ability to work with big data, work with data at all, actually. When I stumbled on this quote, I was trying to catch up with my friends, with my colleagues in my PhD program in Sweden. I started, the place I started was very challenging because they all had some experience with computational methods. And for me, I learned how to run a regression with a pen and a paper in Turkey. There was one computer lab with no statistical package in any of the computers, and working with data was not an integral part of my studies. So it was very challenging. It was a very steep learning curve. I was very enthusiastic to be somebody who can back an hypothesis or an idea with data, of course, but I have increasingly grown to think that this emphasis on backing your opinion with data may be a little bit overrated and potentially dangerous. And I'll try to tell you why I feel that way, because, or let me do it already now. So the whole idea is that if you are able to produce some empirical evidence for some proposition that actually strengthens the probability that that proposition is accurate, you are approaching that probability. It's never one. So the truth of something that is related to social sciences is very difficult to nail down, because we will always be working with data that comes from a particular period in time, that relates to a particular geography. So in our field, doing computational work, quantitative work does not yield ultimate truth the same way we see in natural sciences, of course. And Ronald Coase, who is a Nobel laureate, another academic who wasn't necessarily against quantitative work himself either. He studied firms and firm behavior too, by the way. Coase said famously, if you torture the data enough, the nature will confess. So against Deming's idea that you need to back your opinions with data for that to be a reliable piece of information, Coase's point is also very important to take into account, that if you know how to beat the data, you often can get what you want out of it. So for that reason, I'm a big enthusiast of quantitative work, computational work. But that being said, we always need to be a little bit cautious with how we approach what's being produced by it, I guess. Spatial economics, the whole field rests on the idea that population and economic activity is unevenly distributed across space. These disparities are quite large and persistent over time, and obviously they are not random, so that there exists a number of indicators that we see in common in a number of places across different countries that may help us understand why we see this uneven distribution of population and economic activity. And doing so, the study of these disparities require us to work with what we call spatial hierarchy. So the standard economists used to, up until some 15 to 20 years ago, used to work a lot with the national level data. Nation state was the ultimate thing to work with, of course. Increasingly regional data, city level data, and now more so microgeographical data, neighborhood level data gained attraction. And all of these things can be understood as being part of the same organic mechanism, that in order for you to understand how things work at one level, you really need to have a good understanding of how things work at another level, may that be one aggregation above or one aggregation below. So this emphasis on space and geography came about long before the academics picked up its importance. This is Jane Jacobs, my personal hero. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore, but she is the greatest urban thinker of our times. And she's not an academic, actually. She was an urban activist in New York who fought the mayor of New York when he wanted to implement major infrastructure projects that would split up important neighborhoods that were organically tied to each other, and started this urbanist movement, argued that evolutionary development in cities is very important, and you can actually end up over-planning cities. If you think you can impose the right way of urban life onto people, you are wrong. His book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, is one of the best books I've ever read, published in the 60s and still extremely relevant for our understanding of how cities function today. I warmly recommend you to get a copy of it. And those of you who are interested with these types of topics, please do reach out and I may be able to provide you with a few copies gladly. And she says nations are political and military entities, and so are blocks of nations, but it doesn't necessarily follow from this that they are also the basic salient entities of economic life, or that they are particularly useful for probing the mysteries of economic structure, the reasons for rise and decline of wealth. So when we start working with country level data, often we run into a significant aggregation bias, because the level of standard deviation, the degree of heterogeneity across different parts of a country is immense in whatever dimension you are interested in. This all originates, so the interest in cities initially, and then other forms of spatial structures originates from the fact that we observe, we look at human history, this hockey stick of human prosperity that follows Industrial Revolution, which goes strangely hand in hand with the way we observe urban population. Of course, it happened in some countries earlier than others, and there are certain consequences associated with being a late industrialized, late urbanized country like ours. But the idea that urban population is a byproduct of Industrial Revolution and structural change is a bit of a wrong reading of history, because the very urban population itself is probably what enabled the structural change we saw. First of all, urban population allows people to be anonymous and have access to resources in a way that wasn't available to many people that did not come from a particular family or geography that was often designated to a particular type of occupation. But that being said, of course, this led to increasing disparities and inequalities, both in income and in access to resources, both between rural, more sparsely populated parts of the country and cities, but also if you look at cities across different neighborhoods you have, where you increasingly started seeing income-based sorting. These issues, I'm just showing what I pretty much said, that there exists a very strong relationship between urbanization and income representing, or rather being a very strong proxy for productivity. However, this also means that when one place grows, the other place shrinks. There exists this divergence, almost like bifurcation you see across different parts of the same country. Most of what I will be showing, unfortunately, is with Swedish data, as I've been working with Swedish data for the past roughly 15 years. So when we are talking about these disparities, these inequalities, both in good things and bad things, so both in things like growth and productivity and entrepreneurship, and also in things like segregation and diseconomies of scale, disamenities, crime, inequalities in income, etc. We always depart from a number of propositions, number of things that are really important for spatial economics. These are things like unit of reference. So when you are actually building an hypothesis to study a particular phenomena, for example, the relationship between urban form and income segregation, you need to ask which level of geography you want to work with. Some of the questions that you will be asking will require you to work at the regional level. The others will require you to work at the city level. And sometimes you need to go down even further and work with neighborhoods, depending on, again, the kind of question you are interested in. So the unit of reference, unit of spatial reference, is not an arbitrary decision that is directly linked to the question at hand. Spatial economics is also extremely interested in mobility of people and capital, unlike some of the earlier mainstream economic models. We don't talk about general equilibrium, but we talk about spatial equilibrium, where actually a constant utility is achieved across locations by trading things like cost of living, wage, and amenities. Amenities are things that you enjoy in space, basically. So people and capital are mobile, and that has a certain implication for the growth and decline of different environments, basically. We also like to think about things that make places more interesting and desirable to live in, things that increase quality of life, or proven to be increasing quality of life across different countries. These are amenities, again, we like to think of these as two sets of things that are quite interdependent on each other, like nature versus man-made amenities. This originates from the idea of first nature versus second nature causes of spatial inequality, or first nature versus second nature geography. By first nature, we talk about things that relate to the topography of the place, climate, things that do not change over time or change very, very incrementally, so that if you are, for example, doing a quantitative analysis with that with data that covers 30 years, it would appear to be time invariant. So how hilly the city is, how close you are to shoreline, how many days of sun you get, things like that. Whereas man-made amenities refer to things like nightlife, shops, arts, entertainments, other public goods that are all product of human behavior and the accumulation of population in a particular place. So the ability to distinguish these two things between one another is also extremely important for us to understand how we can study what makes a place, quote unquote, nicer. And doing so, we then can identify pull versus push factors. This is a framework for agglomeration externalities. Spatial economics talks a lot about agglomeration externalities. And let's remember what an externality is. It is a neighborhood effect. It is being exposed to good things and bad things because you are in close proximity, essentially. The concept of externalities is gaining a lot of traction, of course, because of environmental issues and the climate crisis. But if you look at the origins of the origins of the study of externalities, you'll find a lot of things on location and location-specific factors. We also talk a lot about increasing returns to scale and indivisibilities. This is to the so this is a way of understanding why cities exist in the first place and how some of the effects we see from population clustering has some scaling effects, basically. Why cities exist can be studied by many different sub fields within social sciences. The way spatial economics approaches this is by way of micro foundations of agglomeration externalities. The question why cities exist is then reduced down to three elements: that's sharing, matching, and learning mechanisms. So the argument here is that big cities provide individuals with the opportunity to, individuals and firms, any agent that you can think of, with the opportunity to capitalize on common resources, like infrastructure is the easiest thing to think about, of course. So you need a critical mass of people to make the very presence of a big infrastructure financially feasible. But when we think about sharing, we also think about sharing of softer institutions and sharing of other matters like a culture, a cultural life, a way of living in cities that wouldn't be available should the population be below a certain threshold value. Some line of work discusses sharing in the context of sharing of a large labor pool for firms so that they can have access to the right kind of employees. And by the same token, people can find opportunities to excel in what they do. And this relates to matching also. This mechanism is about the quality and the probability of matching between an employer and an employee, essentially. But matching is discussed in the context of buyer and seller markets in, for example, real estate. So if you have an above certain threshold number of people living in an area, both the probability and the quality of a match increases. You can think about matching in the context of mating markets. Some of the most interesting papers written on this topic also relates to, for example, how you find your significant other in space. I know now there's all sorts of things like Tinder, whatnot, but there are some really interesting studies looking at location decision for people or other joint location decision for people, for couples, how your spouse's location decision may dictate your location decision, and how this can also relate to matching. The third micro foundation, my favorite and also the most difficult micro foundation to study, in relation to the existence of cities is learning. This is a beautiful painting from Raphael, the School of Athens. It depicts a city that is not real, obviously, because some of the thinkers that are represented on this painting did not live during the same period. But the whole idea is that having an agora, having a town square, having a space where you can bump into each other, have these serendipitous conversations with one another, unplanned social exchange, how that can lead to both the creation of knowledge, but also dissemination of knowledge that has sort of these multiplier effects. So space is very important for us to be able to exchange ideas and cross-cultivate ideas. And this, for example, mechanism operates at a much smaller spatial scale than cities, of course. Even neighborhoods may be a very large spatial scale to think about compared to what is relevant for this mechanism. Maybe it's at the block level. So let me give you one example. There's one of my colleagues did this a long time ago using some randomized placement that they made in one of the universities where they changed the location of academics at random. So they assigned them an office space. And this is a kind of a good setup for a quasi-experimental design. Those of you who are familiar with it will understand that there's some randomization that will allow us to eliminate sorting bias. And then he finds that if you end up on the same corridor with another colleague of yours, the probability of writing a paper with that person increases quite significantly, so because you probably bump into each other when you are heading to the coffee machine, and you use the same door to enter the building, or it's easier for you to just drop by and say hi, and that may lead to an important conversation. And I think we all experienced during the pandemic how much we missed that kind of interaction that was possible only face to face. So to that end, spatial economics is extremely interested in this kind of non-market interactions, the kind of interactions that are not mediated by the market, that are not monetary in their nature, which have a number of consequences for the success and failure of cities. So I will talk a bit about this, and then maybe just leave it there so that we can have a bit of a Q&A. I have a bunch of material on my own research, but I'd rather show them to you as the questions evolve, basically. But this bit is, I think, quite interesting to touch on before I start wrapping up this presentation. When I talk about quantitative work, computational work in spatial economics, of course, this is a rather new phenomena because we think about access to personal computers first, and also access to the kind of data that would allow us to ask questions relevant to different spatial hierarchies. The availability of data is still extremely limited when it comes to spatial data. Only a handful of countries have microdata that is geocoded, that can allow you to dissect the geography into several dimensions should you wish to study different aspects of geography. But if you look at the theoretical foundation of spatial economics, you can find its footprints in late 19th century, so towards the end of 1800s, a German school of thought, initially initiated by a guy called von Thunen, who was a landowner who had a lot of time at hand and who would look at space and try to understand why things are spread around space the way it did, why, for example, more perishable things were located closer to the city center and less perishable things were located further away from the city center, importance of distance, and how distance decay dictated the way people and different economic activities were spread around. We're talking about a period where industrial revolution is just is being capitalized on as they speak. The description of a system of hierarchy in space between small places, medium-sized places, large cities is quite interesting, because they propose that actually we can think of this as an hexagonal system that is hierarchical in its nature, where depending on how you define the system of hierarchy, places are nested under a larger aggregation, and their ranking in an hierarchical order corresponds to their importance in space. This bit relates to, for example, what you define to be a city center, what you define to be a town center, and how you then see the residential areas emerging around these places. This is particularly true for historical cities and regions that emerged through a very long period of time rather than excessively planned. So we see these spatial arrangements more in early industrialized Western countries compared to late industrialized developing countries or that rapidly urbanized rather than incrementally, so to say. But anyway, so what you are looking at right now is an hexagonal hierarchical spatial arrangement. A would be the metropolis, the center of the metropolis. B would be the smaller cities, smaller towns that surround the big city. Together, these would constitute what you would call a functional region. And if you actually look at the spatial hierarchical arrangement, you will also see that there are going to be these areas, these secondary areas that are often used as residential locations that do not have their own commercial centers necessarily. This spatial arrangement operates in fractals. So the idea is that if you look at a region, it will have a certain shape and form that replicates itself the moment you zoom in at the city level, and the moment you zoom in, even at the neighborhood level, you will find the resemblance of the same structure. So every spatial level that you work with can then have one center and a periphery. And this is kind of important because this relates to the way networks are studied too, right? I'm sure there's going to be some material, some content on this during these 2 days. But this is networks in space to the extent that the centers of these different spatial levels are then connected to each other way better than the peripheries are to centers themselves. You can think of this as being, or you can think of this as having an easier, for example, commute, an easier communication between the centers of 2 cities than the periphery of a very large city and the center of it, right? It's sometimes easier to get from the center of a city to another, to the center of another city than getting to a village, a smaller town that is at the periphery of a big metropolis. This, by the way, idea, I'm sorry, where am I? This idea is used a lot. So this hierarchical spatial arrangement used quite a bit by archaeologues that are studying the spatial arrangement of ancient settlements, where they know the location of some places, but not others, trying to estimate where those lost cities may be. And this is, for example, an example of a Mayan settlement, where they know where some of the locations are, or some of the settlements are. And looking at the hexagonal spatial arrangement, they try to understand where the lost places, lost to the extent that places, settlements that they don't know the precise location of could be, to have maybe a viable pre-study of where the excavations may or should take place. So from all the way archaeological, from all the way from archaeological investigations, you now see, for example, as late as 2018, the Uber engineering team discovered this 100-year-old idea that it may be a good thing to split the space into hexagonal hierarchical bits to do a better optimization. So now Uber is, for example, using a very similar K3, H3, they call it, hexagonal hierarchical spatial index that's been around for, let me think, since the 1930s, basically. So there's no reference to the origins of this literature, of course. And using these kinds of things, I did a bunch of things. I unfortunately will not have time to cover all of these things, but looked at microgeography of ethnic enclaves, tried to understand, for example, things like tipping point, beyond which concentration of ethnic and cultural individuals, the demographic composition of areas tip. often referred in the literature as white flight or native flight. So this is something we see quite a lot in a number of places in Istanbul, in particular neighborhoods now too. Unfortunately, it's not possible to study them as there's no available data. And doing work with Swedish registry data, we have been asking several questions that relates to ethnic and cultural concentration at the neighborhood level and its consequences, both for the integration of immigrants, but also for the way we see how urban population or the composition of urban population changes. This data is pretty cool, by the way. Just let me say a few things about it before I stop. This is a micro data that covers everybody in the country, all firms and all plans, all establishments. It's a full population data that covers 30 years almost, and you can pin down every individual down to 250 by 250 square meter grids, which then allows you to do a lot of things at different spatial aggregations, from city level to grid level, should you wish to use grids. These are 250 by 250 grids showing, for example, concentration of different ethnic groups or different immigrant groups. That can allow you to tease out various issues related to measurements. If you want to, for example, say something meaningful about segregation, you often need to work at the very small spatial scale. Given the time aspect of it, allows you to say something about temporal effects versus long-term effects. So what kind of spatial arrangement has long-lasting effects on a particular outcome variable, for example, integration for immigrants with respect to their spatial context. And also you can tease out the difference between qualitative and quantitative nature of neighborhoods, because not only the scale of things that matter, but also their compositional effects. So this is what we have done, just to show whether it's the size of the ethnic enclave that increase the propensity for an immigrant to become an entrepreneur, or the number of immigrant entrepreneurs around them. So it's like a way of exchanging knowledge. And it turns out the size had nothing to do with this propensity. It was all about the quality, quote unquote, of the ethnic enclave. So immigrants learned from one another. I'll skip and stop here and let you guys ask questions if you have any, and if you have time, basically. Thank you so much. Shall I stop sharing? Shall I keep the screen? How do we do?
You can do both, actually. If you close the screen, we can see who is asking.
Right, then I can see you guys. Hi.
Thank you, Hocam, for this amazing presentation. It was really interesting.
It was fast.
No. Actually, I mean, for me, the data that is generated in geographical level, I think, plays an important role in policy making. And I have a question for that in the chat. So I am going first. So are there structures in place to use spatial economics in policy making and in the UK or in Europe? And if so, how it is used?
Most of the work I have done so far was either commissioned by, so it's very common in academia to do consultancy, obviously. You guys are familiar with that from maybe your communications with other academics. The kind of, I shouldn't call it consultancy, but I do some commission work, but mostly for municipalities and the state level governmental agencies. Just to give you an idea, a couple of days ago, I completely crashed and burned because I was trying to finalize a report on the importance of residential location on second generation immigrants, labor market integration in Sweden. And this is commissioned by the Swedish state. And they want us to look at the very specific spatial conditions that kids are exposed to early in life, as young as their teen years, right? At the age of 16, for example, and how those initial conditions may influence their later life outcomes, like their probability to finish high school, finish university, find a job, make a certain amount of wage, even be engaged with things like intercultural marriages, which is a bit of a tricky thing to talk about, but it's yet another outcome variable that can be used as a proxy for norm banding, sort of social integration related outcome variable. So, and doing so, we could do several things. We could look at this phenomena at the city level, right? I can say, okay, so where do I see a 16-year-old Iraqi kid? In which city do I observe this kid, and what kind of opportunities and lack of opportunities he or she is exposed to? But that wouldn't make sense, because if I look at two cities, the average value in whatever right-hand side variable I'm interested in, whatever factor I'm interested in, may appear to be identical to each other. Whereas when I actually look at the heterogeneity across neighborhoods in those two cities, it may reveal this sort of spatial disaggregation may reveal that in one city, there are way larger spatial disparities than the others, right? So that if you end up living in one neighborhood, but not in the other, the outcome, the later life outcome you have in relation to where you live may be dramatically different compared to an environment where, for example, you see a more uniform distribution of opportunities and infrastructure and public good, etc., across neighborhoods. This kind of thing you could never observe, you could never study at the city level, so you have to go down. Let's flip the story. The state, for example, this was my PhD year, so it was a project that my PhD supervisor was involved. They were interested in how labor mobility could improve the probability of labor market integration. Labor mobility, meaning your commuting means, how easy it is for you to reach from one particular city to another city within the same regional hierarchical system. So how can we tie different cities to one another to have a better functioning, healthier local labor markets that's like a functional region? So in order to study this kind of thing, then you obviously need to work with a completely different spatial aggregation. This time, city is too small. This time you need to actually aggregate things up and try to understand it at a much larger spatial aggregation. So we all the time disaggregate geography or aggregate it up depending on the policy question at hand, right? And that's why I find it spectacular to work with spatial data. So before moving to Cambridge, because this department is very interdisciplinary, very forgiving to quirky sort of mixed methods, and they're not very obsessed with disciplinary boundaries. But before coming here, I was in a mainstream econ environment, and they used to call me the geographer as a pejorative, as if that would offend me. I would take nothing but pride from being labeled as an applied geographer. But it was kind of interesting, because when I was hanging out with my friends that are geographers, then they would belittle me as this economist who is trying to sneak into their community, sort of be hostile, being engaged with a hostile takeover, as economists are known to be doing a lot, right? That they look at other disciplines and find what's interesting and try to borrow from, quote unquote, borrow from the other disciplines. So I've been homeless for my entire academic life for the past roughly like 16 years. An undercover economist among the geographers and an undercover geographer among the economists, basically. But essentially what really excites me is working with spatial data. And I wholeheartedly recommend you guys to do so if you have any interest in computational methods. This was a very long answer. Sorry, I'm in my talking day today.
Thank you, Hocam. That was great. Öner, I think you have a question as well, please.
Yes, Hocam, thank you very much for your presentation. And first of all, I really love the poster behind you. I'm a really big fan of the movie, and yeah, I would really love the link for that. And secondly, my question is actually, so you're actually collecting very valuable and profitable data, especially for private companies. So how do you prevent this from being exposed to, like commercial use and maybe the use for a tyrannical tool actually by the governments, because the governments can change and the data you share with the government will still be the same government's data. So how do you prevent that?
Well, Onurcan, you're asking an extremely important question. So the data is collected by the Swedish authorities, and Sweden is notoriously known to be excellent with data collection, because we have this thing we started using in recent times in Turkey, the a citizenship number of some sort. And everything you do in life is linked to that. So you can pretty much find data at the micro level in Sweden, at the individual level on anything and everything. But you need, in order to have this kind of data, this level of detail, and some of these things are very sensitive stuff, right? So individuals, prescriptions, like what kind of drugs they use, their health expenses. I mean, if I show you, I mean, I can't show you, obviously, that would be an academic suicide, but if I showed you the kind of data I have access to at the spatial aggregation, I have them, that's 250 by 250. I mean, if you are really, if you really want to, you know, isolate a particular type of population and living in a particular area, it's not difficult to do, statistically speaking. If you are going to collect this kind of data and make it accessible for researchers, you also need to have institutions that work very, very well. So the statistics office in Sweden is one institution as such. So whatever you think a statistics agency should be, Statistics Sweden is that. It is extremely, first of all, difficult to get access to data. So the ethical considerations, which team you belong to, what part of the data you get to see, because the data, imagine that it's like a universe, and I have access to a branch of it. So I have to formulate my research proposal so accurately so that all of the variables that I need is very well defined, and I get to see that small part of that data, not everything, basically, right? I don't get to have the data in my own computer. I can only access it in their computers, so that I always have remote access. And I can never work with less than a certain number of observations, because that would flag the Statistics Sweden, that they may think I am trying to then doing this thing I just described a second ago, that I'm trying to isolate maybe this one area, this one group of people, right? So the moment you start working with very few observations, they're already flagged. You can't access to it from a number of countries. It's only EU access. So Brexit was not a very good thing for my research. We are still going through the transitionary period. And it's a very trustworthy institutional setup. Imagine having the same kind of data in Turkey, though. So on the one hand, you know, I want to study a lot of things in Turkey using the exact same methods and the same level of enthusiasm for the country that I care and love so much. But I sometimes find myself thinking it may actually be a blessing that this kind of data doesn't exist in Turkey, given the institutional context, the level of corruption we have. Yeah, I mean, for good data, you need good institutions, obviously.
Thank you, Hocam. So any questions from the audience? You can type your questions in the chat as well. Okay.
I know this was a bit too packed, guys. So I'm really sorry. I was drowning last week. I didn't think through the timing of the presentation, and I had to run through it. I am quite accessible, both in social media, and you guys are most welcome to reach out if you want further reading. If you are interested in this, I wish I stumbled on this earlier in life, like I said, because it takes a while to wrap your mind around how to work with geography. And I'm more than happy to provide you with additional stuff, books and things like that. And I see that İlhan Hoca is here also. So greetings to United States from here. We end up in same events all the time, never met in person, never have been in the same space. So could never capitalize on these learning externalities. I hope we can have one of these things in person soon. Hi, Hoca. Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Hocam. It was great to listen to you. And I'm stopping the recording right now. All right.